Well, good morning if you are in Los Angeles, California. Good afternoon if you are in Detroit, Michigan, or Virginia, or Northern New Jersey, or New York City. Good evening if you are in London, Moscow, anywhere in Africa. Greetings to people all around the world who watch Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio, as you know, is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. Today is the longest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. It's June 21st of 2024. My wonderful guest, who I've not met personally, but whose artistry I've admired for quite a while, is Davóne Tines, who's joining us from Los Angeles, California. Welcome, Davóne.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to get straight to what you're doing next week here in New York because it's something that I care very, 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 very deeply about. The gentleman who inspired the program that you're doing was a hero in my household from the time I was a little boy, and I actually met him and sat on his knee and he sang to me. So it's a very personal, very moving thing to talk about Paul Robeson with you. And let's start, in your view, who was Paul Robeson?
Wow. Who was Paul Robeson? I think that's a question I've been grappling with for some years now, alone and also with my closest colleagues, especially my closest artistic collaborator, Zach Winokur. Kind of at the suggestion of a theater producer we both appreciate, who some years ago suggested we look at Robeson in a theatrical context, but trying to gauge how I could connect to this person. And it was kind of an invitation to enter into a journey that I think was meant to happen and has been kind of a necessary personal investigation that's existed for a very long time. Ever since I was a young classical singer, a young low voiced, bass baritone, I've been asked to sing the song "Old Man River," and some
From
people here
Showboat,
and there saying, yes. Um,
1927 or so, yeah.
Completely. Yeah, the classic song that brought Robeson to prominence. Originally in the Broadway version of Showboat, and then in the film version, and then he went on throughout his life to sing that song. And in our investigation, he continually changed the song. Originally, the song had the N word in it.
Mhm.
And by the time it ended up in a Broadway context, and especially the film context, that was gone. And then I think he continued to contend with what it was to sing the song of essentially a poor black worker singing about bemoaning the sadness of his life, but also looking upon a river as either a symbol of constancy or a symbol of how things don't change, and kind of maybe even metaphorically pinning his redundant state of being on the steady flow of that river. Um, but that song, because of his low, extraordinary voice and command of screen and stage and delivery led him to be an international superstar. He, of course, started, in that realm, but then went on to become an actor, stage and screen in many, many different contexts, and even a Shakespearean actor, performing, in London on the West End, and also performing in New York, and really championing the role of Othello. But then beyond all of that, I think his larger stardom gave him the platform to introduce his social ideas, dare I say, political ideas.
Mhm.
Um, he became a huge supporter of the socialist movement, and mainly inspired by the fact that his father was a slave. And his way of contending with, that part of his history, of American history, was to say slaves essentially are working people. And there are many working people, poor people, disenfranchised people in America, even white, and across the world in many different places, including the United Kingdom and Wales, and on to Moscow and very many other cultures, white and black and beyond, that could benefit from some sort of coming together. If I quote Jevsky, the composer,
Hmm.
um, a coming together of the disenfranchised peoples of the world in order to make change or find a way of being together that is beyond what we currently have. So his stardom allowed him to travel the world and also intentionally share that message. And he really beautifully made it, I don't even want to say incorporated, I want to say made incarnate his social and political views in the very music making that he did. He made it a huge point to learn folk songs of so many cultures around the world.
Hmm.
Even Russian, Chinese, various types of English, various dialects of African diasporic languages. And folk song, because these are the folk song, the songs of the people, the material, the musical material that is foundational to the culture of people, and showing that he a Black American can hold the folk song, can hold the foundational repertoire of many different peoples, to compare them, to bring them together, to show that there is an equality. So it's a deep inspiration to see that he was able to action his views through his art in a way that isn't exactly pedantic. I mean, he made many speeches and was quite an outspoken person, but even in performance was able to um, elegantly and brilliantly demonstrate what he believed in by literally putting the song material next to each other and holding them all in the same reverence. But this led to huge complications in his life, especially that time in America where things connected to socialism and communism were deeply persecuted very directly by the US government, in the Committee on Un-American Affairs. And so he dealt with a lot
I
of
think Un-American activities.
un-American activities,
Yeah,
not
because
un-American
he
affairs.
was on the Council of African Affairs. That was
Completely,
a
yes.
different thing. Yeah,
Mixing these up, but un-American activities, which is incredible that that was even something that existed, although we do have kind of modern incarnations
yeah.
of that idea, very much so. Um,
I'm going to
but
interject a couple of things, if I may. One is
yeah.
people around the world may not know that he had a law degree from Rutgers or Columbia, I forget. He was a professional football player.
Mhm.
He was quite the movie actor, not so much in America, but he moved to Great Britain and created many films in the UK. One of them, he was a stevedore in Wales, where he would come in and they were surprised how well he sang. Another one, he was let's call him an arrival from Great Britain in Africa, and it was about his relating to his African roots and discovering contradictions between what he had been taught and believed and what he discovered Africa to be. These were very political films, but they were also very comic films at times. They were very socially conscious. They were very complete and unlike any films that anyone else was making. Here in New York, we have our city university. They have a wonderful film professor. And last year, he did a series of all the Paul Robeson films. And they're
Amazing.
fascinating to discover how through cinema he expressed a lot of his political views, all the while also remaining an actor and giving a performance. He did silent films, which is hard to imagine that voice not being heard, but
Hmm.
he was an amazing film actor as well. And as you pointed out, politics, racism, other things prevented him from moving forward in America. And he spent much of his life in Great Britain and in the Soviet Union.
Very much so.
Yeah. So I know if you'd like, I can read your artist statement from next week's program, or if you'd rather discuss it without my reading it. Uh,
Hmm. No, I'm kind of curious to hear it.
all right. So this is you, not me. Ever since I was a young singer, I've been compared to Paul Robeson. I was asked constantly if I sang his trademark song, Old Man River, and was told my voice reminded people of his. To be honest, I didn't know much about him at the time and became annoyed that people kept asking me to sing what I considered a minstrel song. Since then, I've learned much more about his life and found that I indeed had a connection to him, but the connection revealed itself not through superficial comparisons of our race, singing voices, and socially engaged work, but through his most vulnerable human moment. Many don't know that while in political exile in Moscow, he was poisoned with LSD by the CIA and attempted suicide in a hotel bathroom. This moment showed me he wasn't a distant mythic figure, but instead a faceted human facing and surviving life's greatest difficulties. This vulnerable moment allowed me to move past seeing him simply as an idol to understanding him as an ancestor. A lot of good words in there. My
Hmm.
favorite is faceted. It
Very
is.
much. I mean,
That's
if
how I think
anybody
of
was
things.
fast,
Yeah. But also because of
it was
faceted, we're
surely.
talking about a cut diamond. It's not just the diamond, the person, it's where the light is shown. So that
Hmm.
if we look at Robeson the singer, Robeson the political activist, Robeson the father, Robeson the actor, the lawyer, the athlete, those are all facets and they're all him, but people see what they choose to see, or they're not able to see the rest. And that's why I'm very enthused about what you're going to be doing next week.
Thank you,
Yeah,
and I really
I genuinely
appreciate.
am.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, he's my hero. So,
And I really appreciate that notion of, you're bringing a context to the idea of faceted, because I think also in this journey of finding him has been about finding my relation to him, and it's very inspiring to know that there is such an incredible model of a person, and especially a black man who sings, to have many facets. I mean, my all of my handles are also an opera singer
hmm
because I'm an opera singer, but I also do a lot of different things
yeah,
in creative work and artistic work, and hopefully bringing operatic performance into socially engaged contexts, not as an add-on, but as the, central purpose, which I think
hmm
is part of, opera's earliest incarnation, people talking about what's going on, or people being very responsive and reflective of their contemporary context, even if that's the 16th, 17th century, and I really appreciate that kind of ethic, or that kind of idea of work, or opera, Italian just meaning work, a thing that is made of the resources available. And I think in contemporary classical music, we continue to contend with the idea that there was a time when that idea of directly engaging the present context um, stopped. And partly because maybe the art form grew to a really brilliant and beautiful place that was full of stardom and full of, I guess, incredible creative invention that also met the zeitgeist of the time, in the mid 20th century. And it also seems that in trying to preserve that brilliance, there's a loss of momentum, that we are dealing with now. You know, it's like the butterfly bloomed and then we wanted to pin it to the wall.
Hmm.
And now that that preserved butterfly maybe cannot sustain, you know, the entire progress of an industry. And further to the word industry, it also, I don't know, it's my own sociology conjecture that, you know, the mid and early 20th century, the time of industrialization, really led to the mechanization of all means of production, whether that be in mechanics or technology or art or, you know, opera in general. People started to think in ways of forming products of any ilk, you know, in a very standardized way. And I think that that takes some of the idea of exploration and ingenuity out of the possibility and makes things a bit dependent on models that exist. In any case, there I think are older, deeper values and principles within these art forms that I really wish people would continually excavate. You know, I'm quite involved in contemporary opera, and I don't know largely how that's viewed, but I think part of it is that it can be viewed as separate from you know the grand tradition of opera, when in fact my closest friends and colleagues are trying to get back to the root of what the art form was. And so even though I'm contemporary, I'm not against, you know, traditional works or older works. There are brilliant, beautiful cultural artifacts that
Yeah.
need to be preserved and need to be brought into contemporary life in a respectful way that makes them engageable or able to be part of the contemporary zeitgeist, which means being respectful of where people are and trying to actually draw connections, as opposed to maintaining a museum and then getting upset that people don't want to come to the museum, especially when you haven't really told them incisively what's inside.
Well, that's a lot to handle. I'm going to jump in a bit. When I teach opera, which I've done for a long time, I always present it as being the most political art form of all. It's one of the youngest art forms. Only cinema and photography are really younger among the major art forms. And as you said, it reflected the times the good operas did. So something like L'Incoronazione di Poppea by Monteverdi or Agrippina by Handel
Mm,
were presented in Venice, but they were about the Venetian Empire. They were about the politics and mores and sexuality in Venice at that time. Le Nozze di Figaro was about revolution. Don Giovanni was about everything that one could imagine in the world, too much to cover here. Beethoven's Fidelia was about political revolution, about the concepts of freedom, human self-determination. I could, all of Wagner's Ring Cycle, Verdi's politics, even operas that don't seem political, like Rossini's Italiana in Algeri, is all about politics and identity. It happens to be a comedy. But and I would say that the Industrial Revolution began around the 1840s, and we started seeing the beginnings of changes and, frankly, oppression of workers at that time in a new way. There was slavery, unfortunately, before, not just in the US, but in Brazil, in many parts of the world, in Russia. And therefore, um, as workers began to try to find their way to assert their rights, um, that too turned the world upside down, and it led to a lot more wars, longer, very grave wars. But opera was always the one that was the leader in terms of technology, so that the first theaters that were lit and the use of electricity were Wagner in Bayreuth, and then Munich, and Milan, La Scala, and then Paris, and a few other places. And recordings advanced the art form. Radio broadcasting this year, WNYC in New York turns 100 years old. In the very beginning, they had Puccini on the radio. Um, Opera has always been the leader. And when it's thought of as a museum thing, it's really that people don't get it. It's the stereotypes of the fat lady singing and all of that. What it's really about, it's the most, I believe, sophisticated expression of the human condition. And we're all human and therefore can find ourselves in characters that we may seem linked to, but many characters that we may not seem linked to. I'm not a singer. If I were a tenor, there are certain roles I would do because they speak to me for what they are. Um, if I were a soprano, I would do those roles. But the point is that even today, a lot of the new works being created are political. Now, there's a difference between being about politics. I know you starred in Anthony Davis's Malcolm X, which I saw originally in the 1980s, early 90s at New York City Opera. A friend of mine was in it as Elijah Mohammed. And therefore, these works reflect the times when they're created. So I imagine that your Malcolm X, which I did not see, it was in Detroit. I saw it in New York with a different cast, would be different from the one that I saw 30 years ago. I'm different. Politics are different. Our view of Malcolm is different from 30 years ago. Anthony Davis's music, he expanded, made even richer than it was 30 years ago. So opera grows, we grow, we change. And therefore, it is not something in amber. It's not the butterfly into the wall, and as you said, and so therefore, as I love the Italian word ben venga, which basically means bring it on, because that's how we renew our art forms in our lives by making challenges. Not everything works, but everything must be attempted, I think.
Very much. And I think, all of that richness and depth and necessity are there. And I think a huge detriment that is leading to continually declining engagement in the art form is the lack of ability to communicate that, to a broader audience. That's where I talk about, the museum doors. There, yes, you can talk about advertising and marketing, but what I'm getting at is hopefully a bit deeper than that, meaning there's so much love and so much to grasp and share, but the invitation to do so hasn't been completely figured out. And these can't be done in, platitudes, but there needs to be depthful thought given to if there's a large group of people, a huge majority of people that don't connect to something. Why are they not connecting to it? And I don't mean in any superficial way. I
Mm-hmm.
mean deeply, culturally, over time, what has been the disconnect and what messaging can be done to beyond entice those people, but make them feel that it is necessary for them to engage this art form. And I think that goes to a philosophical place more deep than marketing or PR could be. And it involves an actual, investigation into an investigation and also an externalizing of what the necessity is. It's not that it's not there, it's just not being communicated clearly. If you walk up to a group of people and say, this is about you, and you can tell them very clearly why, then maybe they might come check it out.
I always like to say to people, this is about us,
Hmm.
because then it
Yes,
starts the conversation about, well, who are we? And why am I presuming to say that you and I have a common interest? And that becomes
sure.
the point of departure for the conversation. I do want to ask you a question, and not
Sorry,
that
but
really,
what you just said is an incredible springboard for that kind of thought. That's literally what the administration within an opera company should be talking about all the time. How to have how to have that conversation, how to have it meaningfully and sustainably with people, that would solve so much.
you know,
And it seems full, or some people might count it superfluous, but I think it's the root of how we get people to love this thing more.
I want to ask you a question before it slips away from me. I know that you studied sociology at Harvard. What in sociology did you study?
Yeah, I was really blown away by one of my first seminars in intersectionality. That was the first time I'd been introduced to that concept, and now it's somewhat part of, some general idea of the complexity of identity and intersections. But in that time, you know, 15 years ago, which for some people is a long time ago and some people not, this was completely new information of how to think about a person in relationship to other people, but also in relationship to themselves, to understand all of the confluence of the many vectors of being, you know, socially, psychologically, phenomenologically, and so on. You know, there are very many layers and valences of intersections, different weights and qualities of those things, and that you could essentially identify or, dare I say, pinpoint a person by trying to understand all of the vectors that come together to create them. That was really mind opening and led me to, you know, a lot of different discovery, but also, you know, the general foundation with Durkheim and Marx, and thinking about what it means for society to create and recreate itself and what happens to it as a sort of, you know, organic thing that becomes that we try to mechanize or try to systematize, and the very many experiments that have gone terrible and somewhat wonderfully, but also media study and consumption. You know, why my main reason I think for getting into sociology was well, first, my parents wanted me to go to to a school situation that led to a desk. I wanted to go to music school. They said you need a desk job, and I said, you know, almost what is the word I'm trying to say? I said, if you want me
Irreverently.
to do school, I'm going to do it as hard as possible. I'm going to Harvard, you know, like, just to spite you or something. I don't know. And but there I, you know, I grew up playing the violin. I played the violin for 14 years, and I sang a ton of choral music and musicals and things, and I knew I wanted to be connected to the arts in some way. You know, hopefully that desk was near an arts institution or in one. And Harvard being a liberal arts institution, you know, there aren't quote unquote practical degrees.
Mhm.
You know, you study economics, not finance, you
Right.
know. Yeah, so the way that I could get at thinking about arts administration was from a theoretical way, was to actually think about how society created and propagated social and cultural produce, you know, why we make art and why we sustain it and how it's sustained culturally over time. I thought if I could have some sort of philosophical lens on the actual existence of the thing, then I could understand how to administrate it.
Um, I'm troubled by words that have come into general usage, but most people don't know what they mean. And I think
Hmm.
that intersectionality is one of them
Yeah.
because, I mean, I understand the concept as you present it, but I think that many people use it too quickly and too easily. And some of those things could be described as coincidences. Some of them are just factors of, who we are, gender and race and whatever, or color, whatever we want to describe it, nationality, religion, where there's overlap. But again, that gets back to the Paul Robeson thing of the facets, that what people want to see or what they choose to see or what they prefer to find is what they look for. It's like a journalist who looks for a story without actually doing the journalism, but just simply says, "Oh, this is a candidate who is corrupt. I'm going to find out how he's corrupt," rather than find out the candidate's thoughts. One of my favorite lines in all of opera is from Verdi's Hernani: "Ogni cor serba un mistero." Every heart harbors a mystery. And I believe in mystery. And I believe that part of our humanity is that we cannot identify to others or for ourselves every mystery, and that those mysteries are good. I don't mean that we're supposed to be malevolent. I mean that there are things we're still figuring out, and that the miracle of humanity is that we cannot describe everything. And that, to me, one of the glories of opera is it's the music that lifts up those words and takes them to a completely other place. And when you have a fine singer such as yourself, who understands not only the words but the music and feels the music and connects it to his own mystery, that's great art. And
Yeah.
I just have trouble when we think we can define everything. We can't. I believe we can't. And you know, as from a scientific point of view, I would love to do that. It would help a lot of things in the world. But from a emotional, spiritual, psychological point of view, I don't think we could do that. I mean, when I work on productions such as Electra, which were rooted in not only in Greek myth but also in Sigmund Freud, it's too easy to use Freudian theory to apply that to a production of Electra. Whereas the driving familial motivations in the opera Electra are part of the fascination, part of the our human frailty, and I think our human frailty is part of our beauty. And if I may turn that back to the man I love, Paul Robeson, he was a man with frailty. And
Mm.
I'm guessing, I don't want you to reveal your hand if you want to wait till next week, um, that you have tapped into that regarding Robeson.
I mean, that's how I, as said in that statement, I found the ability to connect to him through understanding it that there is fragility, which maybe put my viewing of his facets in a different context or seeing a different light from them and seeing maybe how they interplayed to lead or hold someone together in the midst
Mhm.
of fragility. Um, because I think that's something that is deeply human that anyone can connect to. The idea of being weighed down by things, whether they're external or internal. You know, everybody's dealt with a problem they didn't know how to solve at a certain point or been to a point of almost giving up, and then it somehow has still survived. I mean, if you're living and breathing, you know, in and out today, you've been through something.
Mhm.
And I think that that is something people can connect to and also is a necessary thing to reflect on and hold collectively, because that's how we find hope, you know, in the place of saying it really is possible for there to be a change. And this is something that can happen at very many different scales. It can happen in the most intimate, personal, within one's own, you know, psyche and experience. It can also happen between two people in a relationship or a city or a community or maybe broader.
Mhm.
um, you know, this idea that there is the possibility of survival and also to utilize that experience. The reason why we hold it is so that when it happens again, we know what can be done or know that it isn't actually the end. Um, so yeah, I think I've had clear personal times in my life where I've dealt with a certain height of fragility and didn't know which way to go or how things would turn out. And by the very fact that I'm sitting here now, they have, and I'm thankful for that. And I was able to connect to him by seeing his story as a metaphor for my own and seeing how they aligned, and it takes it out of the mythic, it takes it out of the colossal to say we are people together. We happen to have some, if I dare I say, vectors
Yeah.
that align, which you know makes our ability to connect in terms of a metaphor even more prescient. But it is really something I want to invite other people to assess for themselves. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a show that I'm sharing with people, you know,
Mhm.
if there wasn't that clear reason of showing resilience and also how his work deeply inspires my own. I hope I can say that I'm endeavoring to carry on some of his legacy or in part his legacy, or at least am only here because he existed.
Mhm.
Um, you know, that's the intent with the project as well. But Yeah, I'm very excited to see it. Someone told me that the song that he sang to you was Joe Hill.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the
yeah.
show begins with Joe Hill.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because in it, I mean, one, a beautiful, beautiful song, and it's also another allegory. You know, it's the metaphor that Robeson himself chose
Hmm.
to say that there's somebody that's standing beside working people. There is another hero that he could look to,
Yeah.
and lift that story. So, in essence, the show starts with the proclamation of that idea of someone dying but never really going away.
I
And
never
then
died,
that's
said he. Yeah.
and yeah, I never died, said he. Where working men defend their rights, it's there you'll find Joe Hill.
Yep.
um and I think he aligned himself with the that cause in his own way. And I think that I continue to figure out how I can be in service of the greater values that that implies, in my own way. So it's almost like at least three examples of
Hmm.
of how that plays out with Robeson being the fulcrum.
Yeah. I want to get one housekeeping thing out of the way. This will be at Little Island, which is a performance space on the lower west side of Manhattan on an island just on the Hudson River. It's a beautiful area. It's on June 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th. It's littleisland.com, I believe is the website. I gather you're then doing this elsewhere, but I don't know if it's been announced. Has it been announced?
It hasn't. Well, some of it has been announced.
Okay.
It'll continue to tour, very thankfully over the next 2 years, and the first stops after New York, later this year, are in Chicago and LA,
Hmm.
and then future dates will be announced as we
So,
go along.
um, I know you studied at Juilliard. I've taught at Juilliard. Um,
Mhm.
when I've taught there, the president was Dr. Joseph Polisi,
Yeah.
and a big part of his advocacy, he's written books about this, are about the role of the artist as a citizen. And that's a concept I embrace. I could also tell you that I hear people say basically all the time, who cares what you think? Or, mind your own business, or you're here to entertain me, or, I wanted to hear you sing, or I wanted to hear you act or speak or whatever, but keep your politics to yourself. Um,
Right.
my view is that I'm a citizen too, and that a person who might be president or an ex-president or a person who might be a chef or a person who might clean someone's house or take care of an old person or whatever, we're all citizens and we all have the
Mm.
right to express. But how do you perceive the concept of the artist as citizen?
I mean, I think it's almost a redundant statement in that, it's almost just saying like an artist is a person, just like all people are people. And I think the attempt to make a distinction is basically a fallacy. Um, and yeah, I mean, I am very, 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 very deeply uninterested in entertainment for entertainment's sake. We all have outlets for that. We gauge it in various ways for various reasons, but it's never been an intention with my work, even from the very, very beginning when, I didn't exactly have the autonomy to choose and make my own projects. But I did, I think, have a bit of a training ground by doing all those quote unquote gigs and
Hmm.
finding what my personal connection to them was. It was never just going in and doing the thing. It was saying like, oh, this is a piece of something that, I never would have thought of or been a part of performing, but it's my job as a human and yes, an artist to investigate what the connections are or the distances and close that distance. I think that was a very enriching way to engage earlier work. I never treated it like just entertainment or
Yeah.
just a game. And Yeah, I mean, but I do love to be entertaining, you know. I love
Yeah.
to
Mel
make
Brooks
people
has his place.
smile or feel something or have
Yeah.
positive feeling, but only if it's toward an end, you know, if it's towards sharing something. And you might call that political or you might call that emotional or otherwise, but there's intent there. And so with Zach Winokur, we've co-guest lectured a course at Harvard for 2 years, and it started in the pandemic, which made it possible,
Hmm.
but we really hope to do it again. But it was kind of jokingly called How to Be a Tool. You know, so we could say we teach how to be a tool at Harvard, but really we meant how you could be a tool for storytelling and for communication. So the subtitle was How to Be a Tool, Practice an Interdisciplinary Storytelling.
Hmm.
And essentially the idea of opera, you know, what resources have you got? What do you need to say? How do you bring those resources together to say it most effectively? And we taught it primarily to non quote unquote artists. We taught it to, you know, scientists or civic architects or, you know, people doing research in various ways to kind of say, you know, in the arts we have very sticky and compelling ways of telling a story, but we aren't always telling the best stories. And there are some people doing work in the world that needs to be read by the larger public, and we can offer the tools that we have so that those things can land a little more deeply. But I think I've gotten a little off track. We were talking about, well, you tell me where you think I should go with that, because I can bring it back to where we
Well, the
were.
artist and citizen, whether we are expected to keep in our lane, so to speak, whatever other people define as our lane, um, or whether we can be as original and as we not could should be as original and as truthful to ourselves, and that the art comes from that. Um, you know, I don't hesitate to venture my opinions, and I make a very strong attempt to hear other people and really hear them and listen to them carefully and discuss what they bring up rather than reply with what I think again, and this is the way it should be, and so on, because it's arts and ideas, it's arts and
Yes.
minds.
And now I recall why I was talking about the course.
Okay.
In the course, we share a process for how to make something that's distilled from our decade of working together. And it's not an uncommon thing, you know, it's even used in product development in various
Mm-hmm.
ways, but it's kind of our own language or interpretation. And it has just a few steps. I won't go through all of them, but just to name them is purpose, you know, define a purpose, define a system of values or a hierarchy of values that you want to adhere to while realizing that purpose. And then dramaturgy, which we call kind of content versus form. So
Mm-hmm.
saying, you know, what is dictated from the material that you're trying to engage? Does that portend a shape, or do you need to find a shape that lets that story be told? Anyway, and there's a few more steps, but the first one is the most important: purpose. And a way that I've, you know, shrunk it down for myself and for students to engage is a very simple open sentence: the purpose of my project is to blank in order to help people to blank. And the second clause is extremely important because that is your reasoning, or, you know, you earning the right to show something to people. Everyone can have a purpose for making something, but if you don't like intentionally know what it's meant to do in the world, what you're trying to help people to do, then maybe it shouldn't be made. You know, it also, I don't know, I could go on about that for a very long time, but that's when I think, you know, the place between intersection, I mean, sorry, the intersection between entertaining and doing something else come to bear. I'm very interested in, you know, entertaining as long as it leads people or helps people to realize something or
Yeah.
to change or for it to be effective, you know.
Well, I'm going to think about what you just posited. One of my ways of going through life is that I believe it's important to translate experience into knowledge, and not just my own knowledge for me, but somehow that I'm able to put that in print or in speech or in recordings or something without telling people how to receive it, or without creating it in a way that I'm thinking, will they receive it or not? Um, because you were saying before that, we learn from the past, or we could learn from the past. I think we don't learn from the past because we bury the knowledge. And that it's important, really, really important for me to leave what I've learned behind me, and people can just take it as they wish, and that I have no control over how it's received. But I have to be very honest and very thorough in the way I translate my own experience into knowledge, because if we only have one life, what we're dealt with, we can't always control. But if we learn from that and leave it for others what I've learned, I think that's a job well done. That's my aim.
Mm.
Um, but I want to do it your way. I'm going to rethink the whole thing.
Okay.
Um, I could ask you many, many things. I know that you only have an hour. So I wanted to ask you about Langston Hughes.
Mm.
You did, I think it was called The Black Clown. Am I correct? Is that the title? Yes. It was wonderful. But rather than me describe it, I'd like you to describe it.
Oh, the Black Clown. Yes. So I wanted to make something that I could fully connect to when I was younger. Basically, right before going to Juilliard, I was doing a lot of different freelance arts administration jobs, and I was singing at the National Shrine in Washington, D.C., which is a really great church job. It's
Mhm.
quite a pageant, but I, yes, was, loved singing Palestrina masses and all of this gorgeous liturgical music, but was trying to find what I even more personally connected to, or wanting to share a narrative that was something even cathartic or necessary personally to share. And so I reached out to a composer friend of mine from undergrad, Michael Schachter, because I had heard his thesis composition, which was on the plagues, you know, the plagues from the Bible. And it was a really brilliant incarnation of all of the, uh, I don't know, texture and aesthetic and narrative possibilities of that. And I loved his language. I knew that he could realize things in styles that were transversing, different genre and aesthetics. So I wrote him an email during the homily
Mhm.
in 2011 and said, I really want to sing. I want to find a text. I want to sing something that's really personal and involves all of the like depth and whimsy and energy that I want to find. And his wife had just given him a complete works of Hughes, huge
We
tome,
should say great American poet, African American, but one of our great poets. Yeah.
completely great definitive poet, Langston Hughes, came to prominence during the Harlem Renaissance, but is now, understood to be just a definitive voice in the culture of writing. And his wife gave him a complete works, and it's a huge volume, and there's a lot of his work that is popular and people more commonly know, and then there are lots of things hidden in the crevices that aren't really in broader public light. And in that volume is a small group of poems called The Negro Mother. It's about 5 poems where Hughes invents a really unique structure of how to share a piece of poetry, where he writes two columns. There's one column titled "The Mood," and there's another titled "The Poem" itself. And he gives instructions for each of these five poems on who or how it should be performed. With the Black Column specifically, it starts with let's see, The Black Clown by Langston Hughes. It to be spoken by a pure-blooded Negro, in the style of sorry, to the music of a piano or an orchestra. That's all he gives. Maybe there's a black protagonist, maybe there's some music. And then the mood outlines, what should be going on, or dramatic suggestion, and it even poetically shifts itself, from saying a low down blues, or saying the comic entrance of a clown, and the words itself, though, are this monologue to be delivered, starting with the incredible words, "You laugh because I'm poor and black and funny, not the same as you." And immediately indicting and naming the exact audience that it's for. And then going through essentially 300 years of American history over the course of 340 words, which is incredible and a brilliant genius feat. But
Which
reaching the
Fats
rest,
Waller also did in a 3-minute song.
sure, yeah,
Yep,
naming the whole thing, as efficiently but also
yep,
vividly as
yep.
possible. It's the genius of it. But saying, you cast me as this clown, as this person, putting on a costume and playing some sort of role, then contextualizing that within the 300 years of American history in order for the protagonist to reach a resolution of saying, I am more than all of that because I've survived all of it. And the final words, say to all foemen, you can't keep me down. Tear off the garments that make me a clown. Rise from the bottom out of the slime. Look to the stars out yonder calling through time. Cry to the world that all might understand. I was once a black clown, but now I'm a man. And long story short, with the development of that, it was about a 6, 7 year writing process, where we started with just thinking about, art song cycles. We broke the poem down into certain sections and wrote a series of drafts of songs. The whole thing, I think, was about half an hour altogether. And then through meeting a really brilliant theater producer, who's done a lot of things with the American Repertory Theater and on the West End, who had known some of my work, I showed it to her and said, I think this needs more. Hughes gives instructions that this is a theatrical situation. And we had toyed with, if I sang it in recital, how it might be performed, and so on. But the poem is so dense and so rich. It has enough material and depth to sustain an entire theater production. So after writing, up until about 6 years, we then went through the process of expanding it, of making the songs longer, and also taking a kind of oratory or aura,
Oratorio.
oratorio, an oratorical even approach, in that we wanted the goal of the project was to not change or add anything to Hughes's words, to just use the thing that he geniusly made and amplify it as much as possible. So the repeating of phrases over and over again and changing them musically to show different shades in the meaning, very much how oratorio or Bach works. And so what was half an hour grew to an hour and 15 minutes, and grew from one person to a cast of 13. Talk about showing different facets
Mhm.
of, Black consciousness or existence. These characters are essentially facets of the same person, and all share in the proclamation of this poem, and kind of reach this resolution from a lot of different embodied perspectives. But the musical genre of it is as you know flippant and turning and kaleidoscopic as the vibe of the poem itself. There's speak about Juneteenth that just happened,
A
two
couple of
days
days
ago.
ago, yeah.
Um, there's one incredible turn where he says, he says, freedom, oh freedom, Abe Lincoln done set me free. one little moment to dance with glee, then sadness again. No work, no job, nowhere to go. Black, you can die and no one will care. Um, so in the course of one little stanza, he outlines the idea of, freedom and emancipation, but undercuts it immediately by saying we're really not there. And in the theatricalization of that, we could show it even more deeply. We have Abe Lincoln enter on stilts, a comical
Hmm.
cartoon engagement of this man with a tall, tall hat, and he's very tall, and holding a blanket-size Emancipation Proclamation that I, the Black Clown, drape over myself as, kind of a superhero cape while we go through this truly MGM musical Bugsby Berkeley, like this over-the-top dance routine that skirts through styles and is a big showpiece to say we are free, and just to have that dissolve and disintegrate. But the the reason I wanted to, you know, take on this project and gave so much to it over years was because I just thought it was so brilliant that someone could so succinctly in a text talk about the struggle of a country and the struggle of an entire people. And it was something I needed to say, meaning the idea that if many of the white people that I engaged with, I mean, especially at Harvard, it was made at the American Repertory Theater, which is part of Harvard. Um, and in early talks about how to promote the show, there was all this talk of, we have to reach the Black community and we have to go to Roxbury and all these different places, which of course, yes, we should do. But I had to make it very clear, and I didn't realize or that I was like, oh, you have to understand this philosophically. I said, no, I am making this piece at the American Repertory Theater to speak to the people that come already to the American Repertory
Yeah,
Theater and
yeah.
say, like, even in a predominantly white liberal bastion of education and culture, you still need to understand this more
Mhm.
depthfully, because if you understood the context of this struggle, you might look at me with some more nuance and empathy. So yes, it was a very personal journey, but also trying to model that for other people to do as well.
For people elsewhere, not in the States, and frankly, many people in America, they may not know what Juneteenth is. It was
Mhm.
the day, June 19th of 1865, when this was pre-internet and pre-media. The news took a time to travel that Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, which would take effect January 1st, 1863. But the word didn't arrive to Galveston, Texas until 2 years later, 2.5 years later. And so it's a celebration of, I don't want to say it. You tell me what it's a celebration of. I'd rather hear your view.
Oh my goodness. Well, that has been an ongoing conversation with colleagues, especially that I'm in the midst of a project that deals with W.E.B. Du Bois and double consciousness. And it's a thought of like, is it a celebration? Is it an acknowledgement? Is it a memorialization? Um, I think it's very complicated for America more broadly to newly, since the pandemic and since, various racial unrest caused because the larger population and largely white population was at home and had to pay attention to things. Juneteenth has been something, engaged by the Black community for a very, very long time, but only in the recent years has it become more broadly prominent. And I think we still have a lot to figure out about what it means to engage it as a holiday, what the timbre of that is, and what the intention of it is. We have things like Memorial Day that, yes, involve, food and hanging out in a certain way, but also involve very serious state-led practices of memorialization at the Arlington Cemetery and so on. So there's a complexity to that ritual and a duality at least. And I think Juneteenth warrants the same sort of consideration, and it takes time to build the pedagogy of what it means to engage that event and also what it means to create ritual around it.
Now, I want to be very respectful of your time because you're very generous. I've been loving this conversation. I will tell you that a thought passed my head while you were talking about Langston Hughes. I wonder, and maybe you know the answer, did Paul Robeson and Langston Hughes ever cross paths, and how, if they did, and what did they create, if anything?
They must have. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know explicitly, but the reason I say is because at least, being in the Harlem Renaissance at the same time, but also the incredible series of photos by Carl van Vechten,
Hmm.
where he photographed Hughes and Robeson and Leontine Price and many other luminaries of that time. And so I know that that was a fairly
Leontine is still
knit.
with us.
Yes. No, no, no. I didn't. I don't. I hope I didn't
Okay.
make a proclamation that he wasn't.
No.
But no, I'm just saying people that were in that milieu and coming into prominence in that specific time in the Harlem Renaissance. So it would almost, I think, have been impossible for them to have not intersected. You know.
She was born February 10th, 1927, if I remember, 28 or 29. So therefore, um, her baby picture would be part of that series. But yes, I know what you're saying. He did a wonderful, I love the portrait of her. I wrote an article about her years ago, and that was the picture that was used in the article. Now,
Beautiful.
um, a huge question entered my head while you were talking just now. It will take you 8 minutes to answer. If you don't want to do it now, we could do it another time.
Maybe I can try to give this distilled, concise
Okay,
answer.
here we go. Very simple. In 2012, I was the scholar in residence at the Verbier Festival, which meant doing public conversations with all the artists there. And one of them was Thomas Quasthoff, the bass baritone, a wonderful artist, a man
Mm.
whose mother's pregnancy coincided with the use of thalidomide, and he was born severely. I don't like all the terminology. I'll say disabled, but I think we just want to leave it at that because I think he's able in an incredible number of ways. But his particular fate plus his artistry formed a worldview. And I asked him what it's like when he sings Bach and a lot of the great oratorios and so on, the passions, where he's singing and playing a religious figure or embracing the Christian faith of Bach and everything it represents, when he openly has been an atheist, not an agnostic. Was, someone said to me an agnostic is a lazy atheist, but um, he clearly was at odds with the language and the terminology that he was singing about it, yet he told me how he found ways to sing it. I'm not asking about your particular faith, but you were referring to music and the meaning in some of the religious music that you have sung. Um, how does that inform your performance and your worldview rather than are you religious or you're not?
Completely. I mean, I did grow up in the Christian faith, in which Providence Baptist Church in Orleans, Virginia, which is on the way to Southern Black Baptist Church. Um, and that foundation continues to inform a lot of what I do. But as I said, and as I engage many things as metaphor, as a model for seeing a story and seeing the possibility of people engaging things based on humanity, to take the dogma out of the religious idea and to really engage it for the story that it is. Particularly, I mean, bringing it back to Robeson and this project. I've been tinkering with all the words of the songs.
Mm-hmm.
Especially there's a set of songs that are sang very much like Robeson, and then there are many songs that are wildly reinterpreted
Mm-hmm.
electronically and so
Mm-hmm.
on. But what does it mean to sing those older songs in contemporary times that also align with my own values? And, yes, growing up in a Christian faith, but also wanting things to be accessible to people who would be maybe shut off from that lens.
Mm-hmm.
So the song "There's a Balm in Gilead,"
Mm-hmm.
part of the lyrics are, if you can't preach like Peter, if you can't pray like Paul, then go and tell your neighbor he died to save us all. One thing I've been toying with is saying, go and tell your neighbor there is a balm for all, meaning like there is a solution for all, taking it out of the idea that the solution is this one specific thing, and
Yep.
saying more generally that there is hope, you
Mhm.
know? Yeah, those things can be almost interchangeable, and one version of the interchange I think is more open,
Yeah.
invites more people in.
Davóne Tines, thank you. And I mean
Hmm.
that in the fullness of those two words. It was terrific.
Thank you. Thank you very much.